All right, today we are diving headfirst into one of the most controversial, most talked about books of our time, Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power. You know, this thing isn't just a book. For a lot of people, it's a philosophy, it's a weapon, and it's kind of a disturbing mirror that shows us the unspoken rules of the world we live in. I love this quote because it just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the split personality of this book. So, is it a how-to guide for getting what you want, or is it a big, flashing warning sign about the dark side of human ambition? That's really the question we're going to dig into. And get this, the people who read this book are just as divided as the book itself. On one hand, it's considered so dangerous, so potent, that it's literally banned in some US federal prisons. But on the other hand, it's practically required reading for CEOs, hip-hop icons, and military generals. Wild, right? Okay, let's get into it. So what is it about this book that makes it so compelling and frankly so menacing all at the same time? Let's start with just how massive its influence is. We're not talking about some obscure text here. This book has sold over 1.2 million copies in the United States alone, millions more around the globe. This thing is a full-blown phenomenon that has seriously shaped how a whole generation of leaders and creators think.
So at its core, Robert Greene's whole argument is pretty simple, and honestly a little unsettling. He basically says that power plays by its own set of rules, completely separate from our ideas of good and evil. He calls it a game, and to win, you have to know the rules. So he went back and studied 3,000 years of history. We're talking everyone from Machiavelli to Sun Tzu to lay out these timeless and, yeah, often ruthless laws of the game.
And let me tell you, these rules are not for the faint of heart. What makes them so powerful is that they put a name to these behaviors we see all the time but can't quite describe. So let's look at a couple of the book's most notorious laws to really get a feel for the world it describes. Okay, take Law 15. It doesn't just say, beat your opponent. No, it says to annihilate them. The logic behind it is cold and calculating. If you show any mercy, it'll be seen as a weakness. A wounded enemy, he argues, will always come back for revenge. It's a really stark, unflinching way to look at any kind of conflict.
And you see this ancient law playing out right now in the modern corporate world. Just look at Facebook versus Snapchat. When Mark Zuckerberg saw Snapchat as a threat, he didn't just try to compete. He systematically copied their #1 feature, stories, and baked it into his entire ecosystem, effectively starving Snap of its growth. It was a perfect, almost clinical, corporate execution of Law 15.
And then you've got Law 7, which I have a feeling this one feels uncomfortably familiar to a lot of you. The idea here is that real power isn't about doing all the work yourself. It's about using the skills and labor of other people while making absolutely sure that you're the one who gets the credit at the end.
I mean, we've all seen this happen, right? It's that classic situation where a manager presents their team's big idea as their own, or a professor slaps their name on a student's research. Greene would argue this isn't just a boss being a jerk. It's a very deliberate and very effective power move.
Man, these laws paint a pretty grim picture of people, don't they? But is that really how we're all wired? Is life just one big, cynical game of chess? Well, this is where behavioral science steps in and offers a very, very different story. And here it is, the fundamental clash. Greene's whole universe is built on this idea that every single thing we do is a struggle for dominance. But, you know, decades of actual scientific research, from game theory to anthropology, suggest the exact opposite. It seems our greatest evolutionary superpower isn't crushing each other, it's cooperating with each other.
Yeah, so scientists who look at this book point out some huge problems. First, there's the circular reasoning. Greene basically says, if you disagree with me, that's just your sneaky way of trying to gain power over me. It's an argument you can't possibly win. Second, there's zero scientific evidence in the book. It's all just historical stories cherry-picked to fit his theory. And finally, it's just a false premise. It ignores the beautiful, complex reality that we're driven by so many things: love, a need for security, a sense of belonging, not just this one single-minded drive for power.
In fact, when you look at research into what they call dark triad personality traits, we're talking narcissism, psychopathy, it suggests that the number of people who are truly driven by a pure hunger for power is actually really small. We're talking somewhere around only 7% of the population. For the other 93% of us, it's just not our main thing. And this leads to a super important point. Adopting this cynical, everyone's out to get me worldview might not just be inaccurate, it could actually be bad for you. Research from places like Stanford University has actually found that being cynical is linked to worse cognitive performance and poor decision-making. So believing everyone is a manipulator might actually make you worse in navigating life.
So this brings us right back to that central question. If the science behind the book is so shaky, why is it still so incredibly popular? I mean, how are people actually using this thing out there in the real world?
Well, one very common take, and this Reddit user puts it pretty bluntly, is that the book is basically a playbook for being a toxic person. It's seen as a guide that gives people permission to lie, cheat, and manipulate their way to whatever they want.
But then, you have the complete opposite perspective. For a lot of readers, this book isn't a manual for how they should act, but a field guide for spotting and defending against manipulation from other people. It's about knowing the game so you don't end up being a pawn in someone else's.
So I guess, in the end, the book is just a tool, right? And a tool's morality really depends on the person using it. For people who are in these really high-stakes, low-trust places, whether that's a brutal corporate boardroom or the complex social world of a prison, understanding these tactics isn't about being aggressive. It's about survival.
So as we start to wrap this up, we're left with this central conflict, this paradox that sits right at the heart of the 48 Laws of Power. It's a book that's full of these deep and kind of unsettling contradictions.
Think about it. Is Robert Greene just describing the darker side of how the world already works, or is he actually prescribing a way to live? Does reading this book make you a smarter strategist, or does it just poison your mind and make you paranoid about everyone? Is it a shield to protect yourself, or a sword to attack others with? The book really doesn't give you any easy answers.
Robert Greene's whole point is that power is a game, and it's a game that's being played all around you, all the time, whether you like it or not. He just lays out the rules as he sees them, pulled from some of the darkest corners of human history. So after looking at the laws, the science, and the real-world consequences, the only question left is the one the book forces you to ask yourself. How are you going to play?